This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. When you visit the doctor, you probably hand over your insurance, your ID, and contact details. It's just one of the many places that has your personal info. And if any of them accidentally expose it, you could be at risk for identity theft. LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second. If you become a victim, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Optimism isn't sunshine and rainbows. It's fixing things, changing the way we fix things. It's running the world on smarter energy. Because if optimism never stops, then change can't either. GE Vernova, the energy of change.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and today I have another serial killer case for you. It's a serial killer I had actually never heard of before, and this military tie is not our typical tie-in. It's not a service member, it's not a veteran, it's not even a military spouse. The perpetrator and at least one of the victims in today's case are children of military members, a person who began his crime spree while still living with his parents overseas. A man who seemingly got a slap on the wrist for one murder and went on to kill again and again. Get ready. This is one of my favorite type of stories to tell because it's a cold case solved, or better said, a cold cases solved. Join me today as I tell you the story of John Author Getreu, Join me today as I tell you the story of John Author Getreu, who was dubbed the Stanford serial killer. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
On February 13th, 1973, 21-year-old Leslie Perlov wrapped up her shift at the Stanford Law Library. Before leaving, she picked up the phone, the landline, and she called her mom to say, "Hey, I'm on the way." After hanging up, Leslie's mom expected that Leslie would be walking in any minute. But minutes turned into hours, and Leslie never showed up at her house. Leslie's mom, Florence, knew something was immediately wrong. Leslie was dependable. If she was running late, she was sure to call her mom, always. So the silence that night felt heavy, and Florence didn't wait around. She called police and told them that her daughter was missing. She gave every detail she could. Leslie was in blue from head to toe, a blue outfit, blue shoes, a blue floral scarf, and she was driving her bright orange 1972 Chevy Nova. Hours later, at around 10 p.m., two officers on patrol came across a car sitting off the side of Old Page Mill Road, a lonely stretch near a quarry. It was Leslie's car, and it appeared to have been abandoned. But the doors were locked, nothing was obviously out of place, there were no broken windows, and there was no sign of a struggle. So the officers made a note of it, and they drove away. When officers circled back at around 1 a.m., Leslie's car was still sitting there, unmoved. And that's when they finally called it in, and Leslie's mom got the news. Police had found Leslie's car, but they hadn't found Leslie. By sunrise, the search was on. Crews focused on the quarry area, combing the ground and scouring from the air. Deputies on horseback, 30 of them, they fanned out across the rough terrain. The car itself, though, offered very little clues. Leslie's orange Nova was in perfect working order, so why was it parked there? It hadn't broken down, clearly. It had been parked there, it appeared, deliberately. Inside, Leslie's shoes were found, but her keys and her purse were gone. No one knew if she had maybe swapped into another pair of shoes or if something far darker had happened. Then came a very strange tip. A witness swore that at around 5 p.m. Tuesday, just hours after Leslie had vanished, they saw a beige car pulled up next to the orange Nova. A man with long blonde hair was standing between the two vehicles. And then later that same day, the search took a chilling turn. From above, a helicopter crew spotted what looked like a body near a tree. Ground teams rushed in and they confirmed it was a body, but it wasn't Leslie. It was a man. And the man was dead from a gunshot blast to the chest, and the weapon was lying right beside him. The man's name was Mark Rosvold. He was 25, a former Stanford student, and he was actually on patrol for narcotics. Investigators quickly determined that his wound was self-inflicted. His car was nearby, but it wasn't beige. It was an old white Cadillac. And he didn't look anything like the man with the long blonde hair that had been spotted next to the orange Nova. Even stranger, there was no sign that Mark and Leslie had ever crossed paths. His death was tragic, yes, but as far as investigators could tell, it had nothing to do with Leslie's disappearance. For 2 long days, the search turned up nothing. But on Friday, February 16th, 1973, everything changed. About a half a mile from where Leslie's car had been abandoned, searchers found Leslie's body. It was face down in the bushes. Her feet were bare, yet they were spotless, which didn't make sense. Her shoes had been found back in the car days earlier, and the terrain between where her car was and where her body was found was very rough. There was no way that she could have walked barefoot from her car to this location without getting her feet dirty. Leslie was still dressed in the blue outfit that her mom had described that she went missing in, but her clothes were all disheveled. The floral scarf that she had borrowed from her little sister Diane, well, it had been knotted tight around her neck. It had been used to strangle her. Her skirt was pushed up, her pantyhose and her underwear were removed. I mean, everything in this picture pointed to a sexual assault. And while police held this detail back from the press, the autopsy later revealed something even darker. Leslie's stockings and her underwear had been forced down her throat. What investigators did know was that Leslie fought hard. She had injuries to her face, but not just that, she didn't go down without a fight. Under her nails, she had scraped away at her attacker, evidence that today would be DNA gold. But in 1973, all police could do was collect it, label it, and just tuck it away. And thankfully, they did that. Leslie Perlov was only 21 years old. She was brilliant. She had graduated high school in just 3 years, and then she crushed her degree at Stanford, also in 3 years. Following in the footsteps of her mom and uncle, which were both Stanford grads, she'd already been accepted into several top law schools, and she was planning to attend the University of Pennsylvania in the fall. But until then, she was working at the law library, just biding her time until her future began. Leslie's little sister, Diane, was studying abroad in Ghana when Leslie was murdered. And this next part is so tragic. This was 1973, so international calls were rare and expensive. So word came in the worst possible way. A telegram was sent to the U.S. Embassy, and a Marine guard called Diane to tell her that she needed to come pick up her telegram. But Diane, she's, in college, she's studying abroad. She's not expecting bad news. So she's like, hey, just tell me what it says over the phone. And the guy did. His voice was steady, almost mechanical. He said, quote, Leslie dead in USA, end quote.
This episode is brought to you by KPMG. Making an impact is how KPMG helps make the difference. KPMG applies advanced tools and strategic thinking to convert data into actionable knowledge and deliver value by improving performance through transformation, modernizing processes with technology, harnessing the power of data, navigating complex M&A transactions, and enhancing trust among stakeholders. Go to kpmg.us/advisory to learn more. KPMG. Make the difference.
Welcome to
Only Murders in the Building,
the official podcast.
Join me, Michael Cyril Creighton, as we go behind the scenes with some of the amazing actors, writers, and crew from Season 5.
The audience should never stop suspecting anything.
How can you not be funny crawling around on a coffin?
No, that's true.
Catch Only Murders in the Building official podcast, now streaming wherever you get your podcasts. And watch Only Murders in the Building, streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
Leslie was just 14 months older than her sister Diane, but everyone thought they were twins. Same look, same energy, and along with their younger brother Craig, who was away at college at the time, Leslie was always the protector, the one they leaned on. She was the oldest. Diane later told Palo Alto Online that she and Leslie shared everything. They shared a room, they shared clothes, secrets, laughter, you name it, they shared it. Leslie could make her laugh until her sides hurt. But the Perlov family had already been through so much already. Just a year earlier, their dad, Raymond, died after a long illness. And now, 11 months later, their mom, Florence, was left to endure the unimaginable, the murder of her daughter. Florence couldn't cope. She was too grief-stricken to even hold a funeral. She tore down family photos. She threw them away. She was like, I don't want any of this. Diane said that nothing mattered to her mother after Leslie's death, and the loss left, in her own words, an open wound that would never heal. And the cruelest detail, the only reason that Leslie had actually driven to those hills that night, because yes, she went there voluntarily, she went there to snap a photo. You see, Leslie had commissioned an artist to paint a watercolor landscape as a birthday gift for her mom. That means that Leslie went to that quarry voluntarily, but it was there that she was met with foul play. The coroner ruled Leslie's cause of death as blunt force trauma and strangulation with her scarf. Despite her state of undress, they determined that she hadn't actually been sexually assaulted. Evidence was sent to the state crime lab in Sacramento, but in the early 70s, that didn't mean much, but thankfully they did that. With no solid leads, police turned to the press. They asked anyone who had seen Leslie's bright orange Nova or maybe a second car near it to come forward. But weeks passed with nothing, nada. By April, the case was already going cold. Investigators even considered whether Leslie might have been another victim of Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper was the Santa Cruz serial killer who had just confessed to murdering 8 other women. But Kemper, he didn't fit the model. He was 6'9", nearly 280 pounds, and his modus operandi didn't match Leslie's case at all. Then, 13 months later, another body turned up. On March 25th, 1974, a delivery driver named Ernesto Evangelo was making his rounds near the Stanford Dish. The Stanford Dish is a huge radio antenna close to campus when he spotted something on the side of the road. It was a woman's body. She was barefoot, dressed in green corduroy pants and a turtleneck. Her sweater told the story. Its twisted fabric had been used to strangle the woman. At the same time, across town, a student named Russell Bizanet was panicking. His girlfriend, Janet Taylor, hadn't come home the night before. Janet had been visiting friends near campus, but when she left their house at around 7 p.m., she decided not to wait for Russell to pick her up. She wanted to get home to feed her dogs. Now, let's go back to the 70s. Hitchhiking was very common, and Janet, she was an independent woman. She was athletic, strong, and she even trained in martial arts, and she definitely didn't feel unsafe when she was hitchhiking. But when her friend Debbie opened the paper later that afternoon, she froze. The description of the body, the clothes that man had found, it was Janet. Debbie immediately called police and told them that her best friend had been at her house just the night before. That evening, Janet's parents and Russell were called in to make the identification, and the news was devastating. The body that was just found was confirmed to be 21-year-old Janet Ann Taylor. Detectives pieced together Janet's last movements. She had left Debbie's house on foot that Sunday evening, and she was planning to hitchhike, and her home was in La Honda, which was about a 30-minute drive from Stanford, where she lived with her boyfriend, Russell. Her body was found the next morning off Sand Hill Road, just 4 miles from Debbie's house. The scene told the story of a violent attack. Janet had been beaten and strangled with the turtleneck wrapped around her neck, and it was twisted so tight that it left the sweater's ribbed pattern imprinted into Janet's skin. Investigators noticed something chilling. The ground beneath her body was dry, though it had rained at around 3 a.m. That meant that Janet was killed before the storm rolled in. And like Leslie Perlov, Janet was barefoot, but her feet, you guessed it, they were spotless. She hadn't walked there. She had been dumped. Her autopsy showed blunt force trauma to her face, ear, and eyes. The strangulation was so forceful that it broke her hyoid bone. A medical examiner even found traces that could have been semen, though there was no sign of penetration. Officially, Janet's cause of death was listed as strangulation. But it was what was missing at the crime scene that painted its very own picture. Janet had left Debbie's house carrying a shoulder bag, a turquoise bracelet, and a raincoat. None of those items were found with her body. One of her shoes turned up a 1/4 mile east, The other shoe, her belt, and her raincoat were tossed farther along the road, likely flung out of a moving car. Police were alarmed. The similarities between Leslie Perlov's still unsolved case were impossible to ignore. Both young women had been beaten, both had been strangled with their very own clothing, and both missing their purses, both barefoot, their feet completely clean, and their bodies were found just 2 miles apart, though technically they were found in different counties. But it was enough for 2 sheriff's departments to start working the cases side by side. Janet Taylor, though, she wasn't just anyone. She was the youngest daughter of Chuck Taylor. No, not that Chuck Taylor, the shoe guy, but a Stanford legend in his own right. He'd been an All-American football player in the 40s, a Navy veteran who stormed Normandy, an NFL coach, and later Stanford's head coach and athletic director. He had retired just 2 years earlier to spend more time with his family. And Janet, everyone who knew her described her as fiercely independent, but warm and loving. Her dad, though, he called her headstrong. She was the youngest of 3 with an older sister, Susan, and an older brother, Doug. She had a car during this time, but it was in the shop. Russell, her boyfriend, and his best friend, they were almost done fixing it. In the meantime, though, Janet was hitchhiking rides like, so many students did in the 70s. She had just started a brand new job at a marine weather forecasting company, and she had started about a week prior. And on that Monday, she didn't show up. Her coworkers did notice, but it didn't raise any alarms because she was new. Maybe being late was just her thing. And Russell, her boyfriend, he was at work the night that Janet left her friend Debbie's. If he had known that she had planned to hitchhike, he says he would have left work early to pick her up. Police looked at every possibility. Ed Kemper, he had already been considered in Leslie's case and ruled out. With Janet, investigators even floated names like the Zodiac Killer and Ted Bundy. But nothing stuck. And just like Leslie's case, Janet's murder grew cold. Until another death at Stanford. In October of 1974, there was another young woman who turned up dead. This time, it was 19-year-old Arliss Perry. She was found inside Stanford's chapel. But that case would turn out to not be connected to Leslie and Janet's death. But guess what? Her killer? Military connection. And I'm going to be covering that case in this month's bonus episode on Patreon. So make sure you sign up. So let's go back. For Leslie and Janet's cases, months turned into years and then decades, and still no movement in either case. Sadly, Janet's father, Stanford football legend Chuck Taylor, passed away in 1994 at the age of 74, never knowing who had killed his youngest daughter. Leslie's mom, Florence, she died in 2014, also never knowing who took her daughter's life. But Leslie's sister, Diane, never stopped pushing for answers. She stayed in touch with investigators, called in for updates, listened as tips came in, and even listened as those tips fizzled out. She always believed her sister was the victim of a serial killer. And then, 43 years after Leslie's murder, the science finally caught up. Back in 1973, Leslie had fought like hell. She clawed her attacker with all 10 fingernails, and crime scene techs clipped and stored every single one of them. Even though there wasn't much they could do with it back then, in 2016, cold case investigators decided to try again. They sent those fingernail clippings to the lab, and this time it worked. Male DNA was pulled from under Leslie's nails, and it revealed a full profile. But when they ran it through CODIS, there were no hits. So the team turned to Parabon Nanolabs, who used genetic genealogy to build a family tree that eventually pointed to one man and one man only. His name was John Albert Getreu. The odds of it not being this guy, 1 in 65 septillion. That's a 1 with 24 zeros after it. Getreu, it turned out, had lived just blocks from Leslie's apartment back in 73. He even worked as a technician at Stanford Hospital. But the investigators still needed a direct DNA sample. So what did they do? They followed our homeboy around to a coffee shop. They then waited and grabbed his discarded cup. When the lab tested it against the DNA from Leslie's fingertips, it was a perfect match. Police then showed up at his house and arrested John Author Getreu at his Palo Alto home. During questioning, Getreu denied everything. But when detectives showed him photos of Leslie's body, his response was as cruel as it was chilling. Quote, "She's cute, anyway," end quote. That is so disgusting. At his arraignment, Diane asked the court to deny him bail. The judge agreed. After 43 years of freedom, John Getreu was finally behind bars. But that still left Janet Taylor's case. Back in 1974, a young criminologist named Celia Hartnett had been tasked with examining Janet's clothing. In a strange twist, Celia actually knew Janet. They had been lab partners in high school biology. She actually logged fibers, hair, and dirt. She even noticed rips in Janet's sweater and raincoat. But her green corduroy pants didn't show any fluids, so they were sealed up in a paper evidence bag and stored away. Let's fast forward from 74 to December of 2018. For the first time, those green corduroy pants, were unsealed and tested using modern DNA techniques, sensitive enough to detect skin cells left behind by just a touch. Technicians swabbed the torn seam in the crotch, and what they found floored everyone. They found DNA, male DNA, and it was a match to John Getreu. The odds were 1 in 34,000. Not as airtight as Leslie's case, but strong enough. In May of 2019, San Mateo County charged Getreu with Janet Taylor's murder. He pled not guilty, but it was official. John Getreu was now charged with killing 2 young women decades earlier. And tragically, they weren't his only victims.
A message from McAfee. Wondering why the post office is texting you or why you owe thousands of dollars in toll fees? Because someone's trying to scam you. The good news? McAfee can help. With McAfee's award-winning scam detection, it's easy to tell what's real and what's fake over text, in your inbox, and online. If they're
You want a free gift?
Seriously? If they're faking it, they're not making it past us. Get award-winning scam detection today. McAfee.com/keepitreal.
Whoa! That was a bop! Ooh, let's keep the party going with the Claptrap Public Domain Serenade! Happy birthday to you! Let's all loot and shoot! Ba-ba-doo-doo! Borderlands 4! Well, that kind of fell apart toward the end. But you get the idea. Borderlands 4 is out now! Buy it! Buy it, buy it, buy it!
Rated M for mature.
Adobe Acrobat Studio, so brand new. Show me all the things PDFs can do. Do your work with ease and speed. PDF Spaces is all you need. Do hours of research in an instant with key insights from an AI assistant. Pick a template with a click. Now your prezzo looks super slick. Close that deal? Yeah, you won. Do that, doing that, did that, done. Now you can do that with Acrobat. Now you can do that with the all-new Acrobat. It's time to do your best work with the all-new Adobe Acrobat Studio.
In 2016, as police ramped up their hunt for the Golden State Killer, later unmasked as Joseph D'Angelo, which is another case I have to cover someday, a pastor in Illinois picked up the phone. Evan Williams told the FBI about someone else he thought they should consider, John Getreu. Evan had been keeping tabs on John Getreu. He knew he was living in the Bay Area, and he wanted the FBI to know something about him. Getreu had killed before. You see, Evan's connection to John Getreu went way back, 1963 back. He was just 7 years old back then, living with his mom, Mary Lewis, and 2 sisters, Marianne and Margaret, on a U.S. Army base in Germany. I would attempt to say the Army name, but y'all would just be mad. I'll try. The name of the base is Bad Kreuznach. Yep, absolutely butchered it. All right. So Evan was living with his mom and his 2 sisters in Germany because their father, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Williams, was the chaplain for the 8th Infantry Division at this base. At the time, Evan's older sister, 15-year-old Margaret, was a freshman at the American high school. 18-year-old John Getreu was a senior. You get it? His dad, meaning John Getreu's dad, Sergeant Major Charles Getreu, was also stationed at the base. So let's just recap. We have Evan is 7 years old. He has 2 older sisters, but the main sister we're going to focus on right now is Margaret. She's 15 years old and she's a freshman. Then we have John Getreu, who's the guy we're talking about in current time, but back then he was 18 years old and he was a senior. Her dad is lieutenant colonel and Getreu's dad is a sergeant major, and they're all stationed together. It's June 8th, 1963. Margaret went to a school dance at the teen center on base. The plan was simple. The dance ended at 10:30. She had to be home by 11. But when her dad drove by to pick her up, he was like, hey, your daughter left already. By midnight, Margaret had still not arrived home, so her father called the MPs to report her missing. She was a preacher's kid, so in his eyes, she was innocent, responsible, and never late. Around 1 a.m., barely an hour into the search, MPs made a gruesome discovery. They found Margaret's body on a baseball field behind the teen center. Margaret had been sexually assaulted and strangled. A joint U.S.-German investigation was launched immediately, and witnesses who were questioned, they remembered seeing Margaret with a group that included John Getreu, and within 3 days, he became their main focus. When questioned, Getreu admitted that he had walked with Margaret, that he had kissed her, and that she had rejected his advances. But then, he said, he crossed the point of no return. He admitted that he hit her, he pressed his jacket over her face, he gripped her throat until she stopped fighting, and then he raped her. 15-year-old Margaret died where he left her, and she died at his hands. In 1964, which was a year later, Getreu stood trial in Germany. He confessed to drinking 4.5 liters of beer, which is about a case of beer, before the murder. But because he was 18 at the time, he was still considered a juvenile under German law. The maximum sentence, 10 years. And he got the full term, minus 13 months for time served. Getreu would go on to serve 6 years and was paroled in 1969 and deported. Within a year, he had settled in California. Getreu married a woman named Susan, became stepfather to her daughter Kathy, and on the surface, everything looked perfect. They looked like the perfect blended family. But by 1973, he murdered Leslie Perlov. In 1974, he murdered Janet Taylor. And in January 1975, the man struck again. That night, he chaperoned a group of explorer scouts to pizza and a late-night movie. One of them, a 17-year-old girl referred to as Ellen Doe, drove the group. After dropping everyone off, she went home. But then, at 3:30 a.m., there was a knock on her door. It was John Getreu. He told her the boys wanted to come by. I don't know what that means, but he asked to wait inside. But once in the house, his questions turned more invasive. He was asking about her boyfriend, about kissing, and then it escalated. He pushed her down, he swatted her, he kissed her, and when she resisted, he grabbed her by the throat. He said, quote, "Don't do that. I could hurt you," end quote. Afraid for what he could do to her, and she was also afraid because her younger brother was asleep nearby, Ellen Doe stopped resisting. Getreu then raped her while holding her throat. Afterwards, he apologized, told her not to tell anyone because it would ruin his reputation. But Ellen did tell. She went straight to a friend's house and police arrested Getreu the same day. He was charged with rape and sexual perversion. His lawyer tried to argue that she led him on. So the prosecution fired back with statutory rape charge. And in June of 1975, Getreu pled guilty. His punishment? 6 months in county jail, 5 of them suspended, meaning he just got 1 month. And he was to serve those 30 days on weekends only. Justice was barely a slap on the wrist for him raping a teenager. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, he was also abusing his stepdaughter, Kathy. And he kept Kathy silent by threatening to hurt her mother. In 1977, however, Susan caught him in the act of abusing her daughter. She immediately divorced the man. But it does seem like she stayed with him after he was charged and convicted of raping the teenager. that's a story for another day, I guess. 6 months later, Getreu remarried a woman named Linda Caputo. They had 2 children together, and they stayed married until her death in 2002. To his son, Aaron, he was a loving dad, a youth sports coach who taught respect. But John Getreu was clearly living a double life. Now, let's fast forward to 2018 and 2019, when John Getreu was finally charged with the murders of Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor. And y'all, if I keep confusing this guy's name, I don't care. He's just a criminal anyway, but I think it's Getreu. Sometimes I say Getreu. It's Getreu, I think. All right, so it's 2018, 2019. We get delays from COVID. This guy's old and frail. So it's August of 2021, and this old guy is 77 years old. And this is when he finally faces a jury for Janet's murder. They did try him separately. In the courtroom sat Leslie's sister, Diane, who had flown in from Los Angeles. The prosecution's witnesses included Evan Williams, who testified about the murder of his sister, Margaret, back in Germany. Ellen Doe took the stand, and she recounted the night that Getreu held her by the throat and raped her as a teenager. His first wife, Susan, and his stepdaughter, Kathy, testified as well, sharing the abuse that they had lived through behind closed doors. And there was a lot of uncharged misconduct that was brought into this trial, as well, of course, as DNA. After 18 days of testimony, the jury deliberated just over an hour. Their verdict? Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder with an enhancement for inflicting great bodily harm. Deputy DA Matt Bracker told the court, quote, "There is no reason for mercy. She was 21 years old, intelligent, ambitious, kind, compassionate, someone committed to making the world a better place," end quote. Outside the courtroom, Diane Perlov told reporters, quote, "This is not the end. I want a trial for my sister's case. I don't want any deals. I want people to see the photos and understand what a dangerous person he is," end quote. Getreu's son, Aaron, also gave a statement, quote, "We had no clue about my father's past. We only knew him as a loving father and grandfather. But science doesn't lie. With this conviction, I hope the families can have closure," end quote. But Getreu still had to face justice for Leslie's murder. On January 10th, 2023, nearly 5 decades after her death, Getreu changed his plea to guilty. At sentencing, Diane stood before the court. She said, quote, "It has been 50 years since my sister was taken. 50 years he was free while we lived with this. There is no peace, no comfort. Justice is the least we can do. I want to credit the law enforcement that brought us here, that gave us even a modicum of justice," end quote. Asked if she was disappointed that there wouldn't be another trial, Diane said, quote, "I don't need it. The Janet Taylor trial was cathartic. Him pleading guilty is just as good. Now we just have to keep him in jail for the rest of his life," end quote. On April 27, 2023, a judge sentenced Getreu to 7 years to life for Leslie's murder. He wouldn't be eligible for parole until at least 2031. DA Jeff Rosen told the press, quote, "The long nightmare of John Getreu is over. I hope this brings some peace to the families, and I hope I never have to say his name again," end quote. Amen to that. Amen to that. I may have to say it a couple more times this episode. 5 months later, on September 22nd, 2023, convicted serial killer John Arthur Getreu died in prison at 79 years old. Does that make you so freaking mad that he didn't serve that much time? Well, at least the mask was finally unveiled in his death. Leslie's sister Diane still feels the weight of her loss every single day. She told Palo Alto Online that she can't walk alone in the woods. She can't even move through an empty parking garage without fear. And she's never let anyone touch her neck because, remember, her sister was strangled with the scarf that she had been borrowing from Diane. So Leslie was strangled with the scarf she borrowed from her sister, which is really sad. Now we're going back in time now. So 10 years after Leslie died, her sister Diane gave birth to a son. Though Diane's son never knew his aunt, He ended up honoring her memory by naming his own daughter after Leslie. He still keeps an oil painting of her on his wall, which is a portrait that their grandmother Florence had commissioned after the murder. Years later, when fire forced his family to evacuate their home, that painting of Aunt Leslie was one of the first things that he grabbed. Oh, I just love that. Janet Taylor's family shared their own remembrance after Getreu's arrest in 2019. Quote, Janet lived life with enthusiasm and courage. As a spunky, fun-loving youngest of three, she brought laughter and joy to our family. She loved animals, she cherished her friends, and her future was bright. Whatever she pursued, she would have served others with passion and kindness. We are grateful to law enforcement for their diligent, compassionate work, end quote. For Janet's boyfriend, Russell Bissonnette, the guilt never faded. The night that she was killed, he was at work. Her car was still in the shop, and he never forgave himself for not leaving early to pick her up. His best friend, James Schroeder, who goes by Gideon, carried the same regret. He'd been helping Russell fix Janet's car. Gideon remembered Janet as warm, honest, and generous. Once, when a stranded couple's car broke down, Janet and Russell brought them home. And while the men worked under the hood, Janet and Gideon's wife cooked dinner and invited the couple to share their table. That was Janet. She was always helping others. And Evan Williams, he never forgot his sister Margaret. He told 2020, quote, my sister Margaret, as a young child, brought so much joy to our family. She was very caring, end quote. Despite their 8-year age gap difference, he called her his best friend. Leslie, Janet, Margaret, 3 young women whose lives were stolen decades apart, but whose families never stopped remembering, never stopped hoping for justice. It took nearly half a century, but science finally caught the man who thought he got away with murder. And even though John Getreu died behind bars, their names and their stories will always outlive his. And remember that other victim I mentioned, Arliss Perry? Her case was ultimately connected to a different killer. That killer? Military Nexus. Yup, I'll be covering that story in a bonus episode this month. So be sure to head to patreon.com/militarymurder to sign up to get up to 50 bonus episodes. True Crime Army. So what are your thoughts on a former dependent case, like a military dependent? I don't know. And what is up with this man? First, when he was 18, then the 2 Stanford women, and then the babysitter and his stepdaughter. I mean, what gives? I truly, truly, truly am glad that these 2 cold cases were finally solved. But the fact that he died just months after being sentenced just makes me very upset. All right, I do want to give a shout out to my girl Myrtle for researching and writing this episode. My sources for this episode include a 2020 episode, which you guys should check out. It's like over an hour long, as well as news reporting by ABC 7 News, the San Francisco Examiner, Stanford Daily, Palo Alto Online, the Peninsula Times Tribune, Redland Daily Facts, the Newark Advocate, and various German articles that we had to get translated. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next time.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.